So I want you to imagine, just for a second, walking out of a darkened theater.
Oh yeah, right out into the real world again.
Exactly. You step out onto the street and maybe the late afternoon sunlight just kind of hits your eyes. But you realize you aren't just entertained. You haven't just killed 2 hours of a random Tuesday.
Right, it feels much heavier than that. It's not just a distraction.
No, not at all.
Mhm.
Instead, you feel this fizzle shift.
Yeah,
There's this strange, almost gravitational weight in your chest.
yeah.
It's as if your actual, literal lifespan has just been extended.
Wow. Yeah, that is a very specific feeling.
It is. You have this uncanny sensation that you've lived another complete life. Like you've accessed an alternate dimension and absorbed this profound, almost terrifying universal truth. And the street looks exactly the same. The cars, the pedestrians, the neon signs, they're all there.
Yeah.
But the geometry of your own mind feels permanently altered.
It's a very rare feeling, and honestly, it's incredibly disorienting. The boundaries of your own identity have suddenly become porous in a way.
Well, porous is a great word for it.
Yeah, because you haven't just consumed a piece of narrative content. A totally new reality has basically been grafted onto your consciousness, and you are left wrestling with the implications of it.
Well, welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today is to explore exactly that sensation. We are going to examine the profound, reality-bending concepts hidden within the mind of one of history's greatest filmmakers, Andrei Tarkovsky.
And he really was a visionary.
Absolutely. We're using excerpts from his seminal book, Sculpting in Time, to really unpack the esoteric, metaphysical, and psychological frameworks he lays out. These are frameworks that suggest human consciousness is far more expansive, and our modern everyday reality is far more fragile than we ever dare to admit.
But I think we need to establish a baseline right away for you listening. Our source text today is absolutely not a filmmaking manual.
Right, so don't expect a how-to guide.
Exactly. If you're looking for technical advice on f-stops, lighting rigs, or, I don't know, how to block an action sequence, this is not that material. Sculpting in Time operates much more like a philosophical manifesto.
It's heavy stuff.
It is. It is an entry point to understanding the nature of time itself, the precise mechanics of human memory, the soul's desperate yearning for the ideal, and, well, the terrifying responsibility that comes with true spiritual freedom.
So I want to start by tackling the foundational premise of his entire worldview, because honestly, it requires us to dismantle our most basic, fundamental understanding of reality.
Which is no small task.
No, it's massive. Specifically, we have to look at how we perceive time. I mean, we usually think of time as a clock ticking, right? A linear progression of actions. You wake up, you make coffee, you go to work, you come home.
Yeah, it's like a tape measure stretching from birth to death.
Exactly, a tape measure. But Tarkovsky redefines the very fabric of our existence. He completely rejects that linear definition. He argues that time is not a progression of actions at all. He calls it a culture medium for the human eye.
And the biological metaphor he chooses there is incredibly deliberate and fascinating, honestly. A culture medium.
Kind of like a petri dish.
Like a petri dish, exactly. Picture a petri dish in a laboratory, right? It's filled with this nutrient-rich agar gel that allows cells to grow, multiply, and form complex structures. Tarkovsky is suggesting that time itself is that nutrient gel.
Okay, wait, so time is just the environment.
Yes, time is the specific, required environmental condition for the human soul to realize itself as a moral being. Time only exists so that we have the space to make moral choices, to feel, to suffer, and to evolve spiritually.
That completely flips everything on its head.
It does. He argues that things like history, evolution, the building of empires, the invention of technology, these are all mere consequences. They are byproducts. Time is fundamentally a spiritual category. As he so poetically puts it, time is the flame in which there lives the salamander of the human soul.
The flame in which there lives the salamander of the human soul. I mean, that is a wild, almost alchemical image.
It's very vivid.
But how does this relate back to, guys sitting behind a camera? Because he traces the artistic mastery of this culture medium back to the literal invention of cinema. He points to the Lumiere brothers' famous film from 1895.
Right, the arrival of a train at La Ciotat station.
Yes, that one. Now, the way that story is usually told, it's all about the technological novelty. Legend has it, the audience in that Parisian cafe panicked and jumped out of their seats because they thought a literal train was going to crash through the wall.
Yeah, it's usually framed as a cute story about naive audiences who didn't understand movies yet.
Right. But Tarkovsky couldn't care less about the shock value of a moving image. He says that specific moment was the birth of a totally new aesthetic principle in human history. For the first time ever, mankind found the means to take an impression of time.
to print actual time on celluloid.
Exactly. Cinema, to him, isn't just theater recorded on film. Cinema is the literal act of sculpting in time.
To really grasp the weight of that, you have to look at the underlying mechanics of all prior art forms. I mean, think about painting, literature, music. They all require a fundamental abstraction of reality.
How so?
Well, a painter doesn't use an actual face to make a portrait, right? They use pigments to represent a face. A writer uses the highly symbolic, completely artificial system of language to describe a room. A composer uses mathematical frequencies to evoke an emotion.
Oh, I see. They're all translations.
Exactly, they're translations. But cinema, Tarkovsky argues, uses the very material of nature itself. It captures the factual, literal, unrelenting passage of time. A director is literally operating like a sculptor.
But instead of marble, they're using time.
Yes. Instead of taking a lump of marble and chipping away the excess stone to reveal a figure, the filmmaker takes a lump of time. This lump is made up of an enormous solid cluster of living facts, and the director cuts away everything they don't need, leaving only the exact flow of time they want you, the audience, to experience.
It makes me think of a prehistoric insect trapped in amber. Only, in this case, the amber isn't hardened tree sap. It's the fourth dimension itself.
That's a great way to put it.
The filmmaker is essentially capturing a living fossil of time, holding it perfectly still so we can examine it decades later. But, this naturally brings us to the concept of memory. Because if you're trapping time, you're inherently dealing with memory.
Well, they're completely intertwined.
Yeah, for Tarkovsky, time and memory merge. They're entirely inextricable. In fact, he makes the rather intense claim that, without memory, a person is doomed to an illusory existence in madness.
Well, think about the psychological reality of that claim. Memory is literally the only thing that anchors our identity in this flowing medium of time. Without it, who are you?
You're just a blank slate, constantly waking up.
Right, you are a consciousness constantly arriving in a void. He notes that the past is often far more real and infinitely more stable than the slipping sand of the present.
Because the present is so fleeting.
The present vanishes the absolute millisecond you recognize it. By the time you say the word now, it's already gone. But the past carries all that is constant in our reality.
He brings up King Solomon's ring here, which I found so fascinating. The famous inscription on the ring, all will pass.
Right, a classic philosophical proverb.
Yeah, and it's meant to be this comforting, leveling, ancient wisdom. The good times will pass, the bad times will pass. Just hang in there. But Tarkovsky actually pushes back against King Solomon.
He fundamentally disagrees with it.
He does. He suggests that lived time doesn't just pass and vanish into the ether. It settles permanently into the soul. Time, in its moral implication, is actually turned back. The experiences we have had don't disappear. They accumulate and form the absolute architecture of our inner lives.
Right, because if time just passed and vanished, we would be left with nothing. The soul would be a sieve. But because time settles, it allows for actual spiritual accumulation. And this deeply esoteric view of time translates into something incredibly practical. The actual mechanics of film editing.
Yes, I really want to dig into the how of this, because it challenges everything we are taught about visual storytelling. I mean, most movies use what we call the traditional montage theory. You join shots together based on a logical sequential action.
I leads to B.
Right. I show a wide shot of a man throwing a baseball. I cut to a close-up of a catcher catching it. It's functional. But Tarkovsky rejects that entirely. He talks about editing based on time pressure.
Ah, time pressure. It's one of his most complex but brilliant concepts. He means the endogenous internal flow of time within a single frame. Let's try to visualize it for a second.
Okay, let's paint a picture.
Imagine a shot of a wheat field swaying in the wind. Okay. Then imagine a separate shot of a man staring blankly out a window. If you edit those together based on action, there is no logical connection.
They don't have anything to do with each other.
Right. But if you watch the wheat field, there is a certain rhythm, a weight, a literal pressure to the way the wind moves the grain. There is an internal clock running inside that specific shot. If you cut to the man staring out the window, and the internal tension of his gaze matches the exact rhythm and weight of the wind in the wheat that is cutting on time pressure.
Oh, wow. So you're matching the emotional frequency, not the action.
Exactly. Tarkovsky compares it to joining a brook to a spate or a river to a waterfall. You are not editing actions. You are editing the hydraulic pressure of time itself.
But How do you even measure that? It sounds so completely subjective.
It is entirely intuitive, which is why he argues filmmaking is an agonizing search for the truth of the material. If a director forces a rhythm onto the footage that isn't naturally baked into the material, Tarkovsky says it feels false.
It feels strident and manipulative.
Yes. We've all watched movies where the editing feels frantic, like it's trying to manufacture excitement that isn't really there in the shot.
Oh, absolutely. Like shaking the camera to make a boring fight scene look intense.
Precisely. But if the director honors the natural time pressure, the audience falls into the rhythm voluntarily. The partition between the screen and the viewer dissolves. You assimilate the material as your own intimate experience. It stops being a movie you are watching and literally becomes a memory you are adopting.
I see. So you aren't just watching a character's memory from a distance. The rhythm of the sequence implants it into your own consciousness as if you lived it. That is incredibly powerful.
It really is.
But taking a step back, what does this esoteric view of time mean for the human condition as a whole? I mean, if time is just this biological culture medium for the soul to grow, what happens to the I, the self, when time is no longer needed, like, say, in the moment of death?
Well, he addresses this by quoting Dostoevsky's novel, The Possessed. There is a character, Kirillov, who theorizes that when mankind achieves ultimate happiness or ultimate spiritual realization, time will literally die out in the mind.
It will just stop.
It simply won't be needed anymore. The Petri dish has done its job. The cells have grown, so you no longer need the nutrient gel.
Which implies that our existence in this chronological ticking reality is purely temporary and instrumental. We are just in a transitional state. We are here to undergo a process.
Exactly. And this philosophy perfectly explains why you, me, and anyone listening sits in dark theaters for hours on end. Tarkovsky speculates that modern humans are suffering from an acute time deficiency.
A time deficiency, like we're just too busy.
Yes, look at how we live today. We are defined by constant, frantic activity. We are bombarded by a 247 news cycle, fragmented social media feeds, the endless pressure to monetize our hobbies. It is a profound curtailment of deep, resonant human contact. We are caught in an overwhelming materialist bent. So why do we go to the cinema? He argues we are on a desperate search for lost time.
Because we are spiritually starving.
Precisely. We are trying to fill a spiritual vacuum by borrowing the concentrated, sculpted time of the artist. We are seeking the profound, unbroken emotional experiences that we are completely starved of in the fragmented rat race of daily life. We want to borrow someone else's time to heal our own.
Okay, this creates a really fascinating pivot point. If time is fluid and subjective, if it's this deeply personal culture medium, then the way we process reality and the way we tell stories about reality has to reflect that fluidity.
It has to match the medium.
Right, it has to abandon rigid linear logic. Which brings us to Tarkovsky's views on the architecture of human thought. He entirely rejects traditional theatrical drama and what he calls linear sequentiality. He actually compares a traditional movie plot to a rigid geometry theorem.
A leads to B, therefore C.
Exactly. And he despises that structure.
He hates it because he finds it deeply artificial. If we are honest with ourselves, that is simply not how the human brain actually experiences the world or stores memories. Life is not a geometry theorem, so he argues for what he calls poetic logic.
Poetic logic.
Yeah, he believes poetic associate linking, connecting images through emotion, memory, and instinct rather than plot is infinitely closer to the actual organic laws by which human thought develops.
I really want to unpack the psychology of this because it's so relatable.
Yep.
He asks us to consider how we recall a day. If something deeply significant happened to you today, your memory of the entire day doesn't form as a coherent chronological schema.
No, not at all.
You don't recall waking up, the exact sequence of brushing your teeth, tying your shoes, unlocking the door, and driving every single block to work. He says the memory of the day is amorphous. It's like a cloud, with only the central, highly charged event standing out sharply, like a tree in the mist.
It's a perfect neuropsychological metaphor. Think about your own most profound memories. You probably don't remember the exact conversation that led up to a breakup or a sudden tragedy.
No, it's usually just sensory details.
Right. You remember the smell of rain on the pavement. You remember the weird, unnatural quiet in the room. You remember the specific pattern of the wallpaper behind the person's head. Everything else is just a haze. So Tarkovsky asks, why do movies insist on showing us the tying of the shoes and the driving of the car?
Because we're used to it.
Yeah, it's a false reality constructed simply to make us comfortable.
But wait, let me push back on this a bit on behalf of the listener. I understand that memory is fragmented, but as humans, we use linear narrative to make sense of the chaos, don't we? If you intentionally break linear logic and just show a series of emotionally linked images, aren't you just going to alienate your audience?
It's a huge risk.
Doesn't that just become confusing, pretentious art house cinema? Even in the source material, Tarkovsky includes excerpts from letters he received from furious viewers after his film Mirror was released. And Mirror is full of this poetic logic and time jumping.
Oh, people were so angry.
Yeah, there's an engineer who wrote in saying he developed a severe headache trying to logically analyze the connections. Another guy wrote in calling it vulgar, unhealthy trash, and a blank shot. If your audience is getting a migraine and calling your life's work trash, haven't you fundamentally failed to communicate?
It's a vital question, and it's one Tarkovsky wrestled with deeply. He didn't enjoy being misunderstood. But this reveals his psychological motivation behind rejecting linear logic. He argues that linear logic spoon-feeds deductions to the audience.
It does the work for you.
Exactly. It presents a final, packaged conclusion requiring zero intellectual or emotional effort. And by doing the work for you, it makes you a passive consumer. You're just eating the meal prepared for you. But poetic logic, where images are linked by emotional resonance, demands that the spectator become an active co-creator.
So you have to put in the effort.
Yes,
Yeah.
you have to fill in the blanks with your own soul, your own memories, your own pain. You share, as he beautifully puts it, the misery and joy of bringing an image into being. True communication, to Tarkovsky, is not about making things easy.
It's not just a data transfer.
No, it is not the mere transfer of data from a transmitter to a receiver. True communication requires passionate commitment and exertion from both sides. It is the literal meeting of minds.
So the engineer got a headache because he was trying to solve the movie like a math problem rather than experiencing it like a piece of music.
Yes. The engineer was refusing to be vulnerable. He wanted the safety of a theorem. But contrast that engineer with another letter Tarkovsky received from a working woman in Novosibirsk.
Oh, this part was incredible.
She didn't try to solve the film. She wrote to him and said, "Everything that torments me is all there in your film. I see it as if in a mirror. I felt for the first time in my life that I was not alone."
I felt for the first time in my life that I was not alone. I mean, stop right there. That is the ultimate pinnacle goal of any art form, isn't it? To bridge the agonizing gap between two isolated consciousnesses.
Precisely. And Tarkovsky's point is that you simply cannot achieve that level of profound connection through a safe, linear plot. Words and linear plots often fail utterly to express the sheer terror, the overwhelming complexity, and the agonizing joy of existing.
They just fall short.
They do. Poetic images bypass the intellect, which is always trying to categorize, defend, and distance itself, and they strike the soul directly. It requires the audience to drop their armor, which is exactly why it angers people who want to remain guarded and purely analytical.
Okay, so if we accept that this poetic, dreamlike logic is actually truer to our internal reality than strict A to B logic, we have to look at the specific building blocks of these memories and images. How do we spot the absolute truth in a world that is completely saturated with artificial cinematic cliches?
Because we were swimming in a sea of content.
Right. We are constantly told what reality is supposed to look like. Yeah. And Tarkovsky absolutely despises genre templates. He talks about how directors use formalist cliches to signal emotion.
Like the classic lover separated by a fence.
Yes. Showing two lovers separated by a chain-link fence to symbolize their emotional distance. He thinks that is incredibly lazy. And more importantly, he thinks it's completely false. He argues that true-to-life phenomena are actually defined by their absolute distinctiveness and their apparent absurdity, not by how ordinary or familiar they are.
This is one of the most brilliant paradoxes at the heart of his philosophy. We are culturally conditioned to believe that to be relatable, to show universal truth, you must be general. You must show an everyman in an everyday situation.
You sand down the rough edges so everyone can project themselves onto the character.
Exactly. The Hollywood demographic model. Make it broad enough to appeal to all four quadrants. But Tarkovsky says the exact opposite is true. He says the more unique, singular, and idiosyncratic an artistic image is, the more it mysteriously touches on universal truth.
Because real life is weird.
Because real life, when you actually observe it without the filter of Hollywood cliches, is endlessly bizarrely strange. He provides these incredibly harrowing real-world examples to prove his point.
Yes, these examples really stuck with me because they are so uncomfortable. He describes a historical incident of a group of soldiers about to be executed for treason. They are standing against a hospital wall in autumn.
A completely bleak scenario.
Totally. They are ordered to take off their coats and their boots. And one of the condemned men, who is wearing holy socks, spends a long time walking around the puddles on the ground, desperately looking for a dry spot to carefully set down the coat and boots that he is literally never going to need again. He will be dead in 60 seconds.
It is a devastating, almost unbelievable image, and yet it rings with absolute psychological truth.
But why? Why does he care about his socks getting wet if he's about to face a firing squad?
Because when the human brain is pushed to the absolute limit of trauma and existential terror, it cannot process the abyss. It clings to the absurdly mundane. The physical habit of not stepping in a puddle is a desperately human attempt to maintain order in the face of complete annihilation.
Wow. It's just an automatic defense mechanism.
Exactly. Tarkovsky pairs it with another historical example. A man whose leg has just been severed by a tram in the street. He is propped against a wall waiting for an ambulance, surrounded by a gawking, horrified crowd.
Which is horrifying.
And the man is so deeply embarrassed by the spectacle he is creating that he politely takes a handkerchief out of his pocket and lays it over the bloody stump to shield it from the onlookers.
It's pure absurdity, but it feels so violently real. If you tried to invent a scene of a man getting his leg cut off for a standard movie, you'd have him screaming in agony, cursing the heavens, maybe dramatically reaching for his loved one.
Because that's the cliche we've been taught to expect.
Right, but the reality is a man in profound biological shock, politely worrying about social decorum while bleeding to death. It completely bypasses our intellectual concept of tragedy and hits us with the visceral truth of human vulnerability.
And this reveals a massive insight into human identity. Our deepest truths aren't found in broad, relatable, logical behavioral models. They're found in our most absurd, paradoxical behaviors. Tarkovsky applies this exact same rule to the concept of dreams on film.
Oh, this is a light bulb moment for me. He insists that dreams shouldn't be shot with blurry lenses, misty fog machines, or slow-motion tricks, which is how, 99% of dreams are shown in media.
Right, because that's an intellectual cliche of a dream. It's fuzzy, so it must be a dream. But how do you actually experience a dream when you are in it?
It feels more real than waking life. I immediately thought of surrealist painters like Salvador Dali. The reason Dali's painting of the melting clocks, the persistence of memory, is so deeply unsettling isn't because it's painted with hazy, abstract brushstrokes.
It's the exact opposite.
Yes, it's painted with hyper-realistic, photographic precision. The impossible is rendered with absolute clarity. Tarkovsky says the logic of a dream is terrifyingly precise. It is an unusual combination of entirely real material elements.
And if we connect this back to his broader philosophy, it suggests that the character image in art, think of Shakespeare's Hamlet or Dostoevsky's Raskolnikov, is actually richer and more vital than real life itself.
Wait, how can a fictional character be truer than a real person?
Well, because you don't meet a Hamlet at the grocery store. In real life, our interactions are clouded by small talk, social pleasantries, and hidden motives. But Hamlet represents an absolute, concentrated truth about human hesitation, existential dread, and moral paralysis.
He's unburdened by the mundanity of everyday life.
Exactly. By presenting something so singularly hyper-real, so absurdly focused, the artist pierces through the illusion of ordinary realism and touches the absolute reality of the human condition.
Which brings us to the core tension of this entire deep dive. Why must we search so desperately for this truth? Why is it so vitally important to pierce through the everyday illusion? We've talked about time, memory, and poetic logic, but to what end?
Tarkovsky's answer is pretty bleak, honestly, but incredibly powerful.
Right. He believes that humanity is suffering from a terminal disease of the soul, a profound spiritual crisis brought on by a total, all-consuming obsession with material progress. And he traces this human agony all the way back to the literal beginning, the Garden of Eden.
He frames human history as a relentless, agonizing journey of self-knowledge that began the exact moment Adam and Eve ate the apple, discovered they were naked, and experienced shame.
That moment of shame for Tarkovsky is the awakening of the moral conscience. Before the apple, we were essentially animals in a state of grace, operating on pure instinct.
But the moment we felt shame, we became moral beings. And ever since then, we have been on a journey of spiritual evolution that has no endpoint. But somewhere along the line, we got completely distracted.
He offers a scathing, totally impartial critique of modern society. And what's fascinating is that, writing during the Cold War, he takes aim equally at both sides. We're just reporting his views here. But he criticizes Marxist historical materialism in the East just as harshly as capitalist consumerism in the West.
He doesn't take sides at all. He sees both systems as fundamentally flawed because both prioritize material and technological progress over spiritual development. Whether you are building a communist utopia based on labor or a capitalist empire based on consumption, you have treated the universe as a soulless machine.
And worse, you have reduced human beings to mere nuts and bolts meant to keep that machine running. He warns that mankind is literally on the verge of nuclear annihilation. And yes, he was writing this during the Cold War, but looking at the world today, it feels terrifyingly relevant.
It really does.
He argues that we are facing this destruction because we have split the indivisible human process. We've completely mastered our material reality. We can split the atom, we can build artificial intelligence, we can fly to Mars, but our spiritual progress has completely stalled. We have the technology of gods, but the spiritual maturity of infants.
And this is exactly where his philosophical framework of art comes in. He calls art a hieroglyphic of absolute truth. He believes modern art took a catastrophic wrong turn by focusing on the individual's eccentric self-assertion.
You mean art as just expressing myself, or showing off how clever or provocative I can be?
Yes, exactly. For Tarkovsky, true art has absolutely nothing to do with self-expression. True art is a sacrifice. The artist is not a superstar or an influencer. The artist is a servant. They are perpetually trying to pay for a miraculous, agonizing gift that has been given to them.
Their duty is to remind humanity of its spiritual dignity.
Because without that reminder, we become what he calls the blind consumer. And this section of the text is so incredibly sharp. He talks about how we feel this spiritual depression, this deep, gnawing anxiety, this profound need for love.
And how does the modern world teach us to treat it?
We try to cure a spiritual disease with material transactions. We go to the psychiatrist, we pay the going hourly rate, and we expect to be logically cured of our existential dread. Or, as he bluntly puts it, we go to a brothel to buy the illusion of intimacy.
We try to use money, currency, and transactional logic to purchase peace of mind, completely ignoring the fact that peace of mind and true love simply cannot be bought.
It's a fundamental misunderstanding of what the soul needs.
But let me pause here and challenge this on a very fundamental human level. Isn't the whole point of human life to be happy? I mean, Tarkovsky himself quotes the Russian writer Korolenko in the text, who said, "Man is born for happiness like a bird for flight." We all just want to be happy, comfortable, and safe.
It's the most natural desire in the world.
So why is Tarkovsky so endlessly obsessed with suffering and agonizing moral journeys? Why can't we just enjoy the flight?
Because it's the central friction of his entire worldview. He addresses that exact Korolenko quote and violently rejects it. He brings in a counter-argument using the biblical book of Job. Man is born into trouble as the sparks fly upwards.
Okay, so trouble is inevitable.
Yes. For Tarkovsky, happiness is a meaningless bourgeois abstract concept for a soul that is set on infinity.
I'm struggling to see how happiness is meaningless, though.
Think of it this way. If you achieve total frictionless satisfaction, if you have the perfect house, the perfect job, and zero conflict, what happens to your internal life, your spiritual evolution stops dead. You become a stagnant pond.
Because there's no pressure to grow.
Right. Suffering, in his view, is the friction required to elevate the soul. It is the necessary catalyst for self-knowledge. Without suffering, without an agonizing gulf between the ideal spiritual realm we yearn for and the flawed material reality we actually live in, we cannot confirm our own spiritual dignity.
So if you are perfectly content with the material world as it is, you have essentially abandoned your divine potential. You've accepted being a cog in the machine.
That is exactly his point.
Okay, that is a heavy diagnosis. So if materialism is destroying us, and if suffering is the necessary friction for elevation, what is the ultimate solution? How do we actually survive this spiritual crisis without just giving in to despair?
Well, Tarkovsky points to a radical, almost incomprehensible form of human behavior as the only way out. He introduces the archetype of the holy fool.
Ah, the holy fool.
In the Russian Orthodox tradition, the holy fool, or Yurodivy, is a highly specific archetype. It is someone who acts entirely outside normal, pragmatic, rational logic out of a profound spiritual conviction.
To the outside world, to the neighbors and the authorities, they look completely insane.
They do. They might give away all their possessions, speak in riddles, or subject themselves to extreme hardship. But internally, they're operating on a much higher plane of truth. Tarkovsky embeds this archetype deeply into the protagonist of his film.
Yes, let's ground this by looking at his film Stalker. because this illustrates the concept perfectly. The main character, the stalker, works as a guide. He illegally leads desperate people into a quarantined, highly dangerous, and miraculous area known simply as the Zone.
And we should provide context on the zone for the listener because it's vital. The zone is an area where the normal laws of physics no longer apply. It is full of invisible, lethal traps.
Right, it's incredibly dangerous.
But at the center of the zone is a room that is rumored to grant a person's deepest, most innermost desire. Not the desire they say they want, but the desire their soul actually harbors.
So the stalker risks his life and faces imprisonment to lead intellectuals and scientists to this room. Outwardly, the stalker seems weak, pathetic, and a total failure in the eyes of society. He is poor, his family suffers, he is constantly terrified.
But Tarkovsky reveals that his true, unbreakable strength is his selfless will to serve others. He is a holy fool because he doesn't use the zone to get rich. He does it to help a cynical, materialistic world find a shred of hope.
And even more profoundly, we have to look at the stalker's wife.
Oh, her monologue at the end of the film is staggering.
It really is. She has lived a life of untold misery because of him. He's been in and out of prison. They have a child who is physically disabled, presumably from his exposure to the radioactive zone. By any pragmatic, rational metric, she should have left him years ago.
Any logical person would have.
Right, but she loves him with this unyielding, entirely one-sided devotion. Tarkovsky calls her love a miracle that completely defies the cynical, calculating logic of the modern world.
And he takes this concept of the holy fool to its absolute terrifying extreme in his final film, The Sacrifice.
Oh, this one is intense.
It is. The main character, Alexander, is an intellectual who realizes that an impending nuclear holocaust is about to destroy the entire world. The bombers are literally flying overhead. To avert the end of the world, he makes a vow to God. He promises to give up everything that ties him to the material world.
He literally burns his own beautiful house to the ground, he abandons his beloved young son, and he takes a vow of permanent, lifelong silence. Now, from a rational, empirical, psychiatric standpoint, Alexander has suffered a psychotic break.
Yeah.
He is a madman who needs to be institutionalized.
But Tarkovsky's definition of absolute love demands exactly this level of extremity. He says that true love must be a sacrifice, a total giving of the self.
No half measures.
None. If it involves any selfish pragmatism, if you are calculating what you get in return, if you're treating love as a transaction where you invest affection and expect a return on investment, then, as he writes, it is impotent. For the moment, it is nothing.
This is where we hit the absolute esoteric, reality-bending climax of his philosophy. Alexander's action in burning his house might seem like an absurd, meaningless gesture of a madman. But Tarkovsky suggests that such selfless, totally irrational sacrifice is the only thing that actually alters the course of history and empirical reality.
It is a spiritual force that literally bends the physical universe.
To back that up, he highlights an incredible anecdote in the book about the famous Soviet physicist Lev Landau. Landau was a Nobel Prize winner, a master of empirical material science, a man whose entire life was dedicated to the provable, calculable laws of physics.
A completely logical mind.
Yes. And Tarkovsky met him once on a beach in the Crimea and asked him point blank, out of nowhere, does God exist or not?
And Landau, this giant of empirical science, pauses for 3 minutes. He looks at him helplessly and finally says, I think so.
I think so.
It underscores the point perfectly. Even the absolute masters of empirical matter, the people who map the atoms and the physical architecture of the universe, ultimately recognize a higher, unprogrammed phenomenon.
The material world is not the final word.
No, the material world, with all its logic and equations, is just the surface. There is a spiritual reality operating above it.
But I have to ask you, and I think you listening are probably wondering this too, what does this actually mean for our daily lives? When Alexander burns his house down, or when the stalker leads people through invisible, lethal traps into the zone, we are being asked to literally commit arson or wander into radioactive exclusion zones, are we?
I certainly hope not.
Right. So how do we actually apply the philosophy of the holy fool when we have to pay rent, feed our kids, and exist in a modern economy?
We absolutely shouldn't take the physical acts of the characters completely literally. They are extreme cinematic metaphors. They are outward physical manifestations of an internal spiritual severing. What Tarkovsky is asking for is a fundamental, radical shift in how we orient our lives.
Okay, so it's an internal shift.
Yes. The individual must make a deliberate stand against the rat race. We must refuse to harness other people for our own pragmatic gain. Burning the house down represents destroying our deep attachment to the material safety and social status that keeps us spiritually asleep.
So it's about stepping off the treadmill of calculation.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
about looking at your life and identifying where you are operating strictly on transaction. The ultimate reality he is telling us is that the capacity to love without condition, without expecting a return, as an act of pure, sometimes absurd sacrifice is the only truly unshakable element in human existence.
It transcends everything else.
It is the only thing that cannot be quantified, monetized, or destroyed by the material world. It is the only thing that proves we are more than highly evolved biological machines.
Let's take a breath and recap the massive descent we've just taken, because we have covered an immense amount of philosophical ground today. We started with the radical idea of cinema as a matrix for capturing actual time, turning time itself into a biological culture medium for the soul to grow.
Which completely reframes how we watch movies.
It really does. We move through the psychological reality of human memory, discarding linear geometry theorem plots in favor of the poetic logic of clouds and mist. We explored the deep absurdity of true realism, where the most bizarre, hyper-focused human behaviors like avoiding a puddle before an execution reveal the most universal truths about our vulnerability.
We navigated the modern spiritual void, addressing the dire danger of splitting our material success from our spiritual growth.
And finally, we arrived at radical, self-sacrificing love, the archetype of the holy fool, as the ultimate reality-bending anchor of human consciousness.
It is a worldview that demands absolute everything from both the artist and the audience. It does not let you off the hook. Tarkovsky suggests that the true artistic image is the one thing mankind has ever created in a spirit of total, selfless surrender.
Because it has no practical application.
Right. Art has no pragmatic use. You can't eat it, it doesn't build a bridge, it doesn't cure a virus, it doesn't generate quarterly profits. But our capacity to create it and our desperate, agonizing need to experience it in dark theaters is the ultimate proof that we are made in the image of a divine creator.
Which brings us right back to that darkened theater where we started. You step out into the sunlight, the cars are still driving by, the neon signs are still buzzing, the world is exactly the same, but you are not. I want you to look around your life right now. Are you living strictly by linear, pragmatic, calculating material logic?
Are you trying to solve the deep, inexplicable spiritual ache in your chest with a mere transaction?
Or are you willing to view your own life through the lens of poetic logic? Are you willing to see your existence not as a rigid geometry theorem that must be solved, but as a masterpiece demanding your own personal, beautiful, and perhaps slightly absurd sacrifice? Something to mull over. Until next time, keep diving deep.